I had the privilege this year of serving as Program Chair of ICFP, and that means, among many other things, that I get to give a report now with some personal reflections on how the conference has gone from the perspective of the Program Committee and so on. So this is me giving my personal report, but one thing I want to do before I go any further today is acknowledge the importance of the community that supports and builds, the community that is here today that supports the conference. And in particular, I want to mention Jeremy Gibbons, our General Chair. Jeremy has been an outstanding General Chair. He's been a constant support for me. Anytime I had questions, anytime I needed some assistance, Jeremy was there to help. He's done an amazing amount of work to make this conference, and I think make this conference work, and I think we should all give him a round of applause as our thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. So, of course, it's not just the chairs, but also the steering committee that sits behind ICFP. And then there's the support team, Annabelle and Marta outside, Dirk and Simone that do put the proceedings together for us, and all kinds of other people here. There's the student volunteers, the army of student volunteers that are feeding us questions all the time and making sure we can register at appropriate times. There's the program committee that are doing all the hard work of reviewing the papers. Actually, not all the hard work, because there's also all the additional reviewers that contribute here. And the next one, I couldn't actually, oh no, that one's all the authors and all the speakers, the invited. We've had two wonderful invited speakers here and everybody else. And this is the next animation. My machine just couldn't handle it, so I'm just going to go directly to show all the attendees. The community is what makes ICFP work. And in my role as Program Chair, nothing could have come across more clearly than the importance of the community and what we do here, and how everybody plays an important role in making it work. I particularly want to thank this group of 22 people. These are the Program Committee for ICFP 2017. 22 people is actually, I think, the largest program committee that ICFP has ever had in its history. This was a wonderful group to work with. I was constantly humbled and impressed and grateful for the commitment, the hard work, the expertise that these folks showed, both individually and working together as a group. So it was a real pleasure to work with these folks, and I'd like you to give them a round of applause too. So I'll tell you just a little bit about the process that we went through. I can tell you all kinds of more details if you want, but really, at least publicly, everything started just at the very end of 2016 when the call for papers went out. At the very end of February, we received 127 submissions, and those submissions it was a double-blind process, so that meant nobody knew who the authors were, nobody knew who the reviewers were, all that kind of thing. And we had about 6 weeks or so. There was an author response period, the traditional 72 hours for the authors to see their reviews and make some comments. And then at the very end of April, we had the program committee meeting. There was a lot of angst at the time about environmental concerns of all the travel, and also about some travel bans that had come into play at the time. But in the end, we went ahead with the in-person program committee meeting in Portland. As our sort of input to that process, we had 432 reviews, which works out as just a little under 3.5 reviews for each of the papers. And then on May the 1st, the author notifications went out, and we had accepted 44 papers, which is actually another record for ICFP in the number of papers accepted here. There's a new twist this year, which I'll say a little bit more about briefly in a moment, but we had some papers had mandatory revisions that were requested this time, and so the mandatory revisions were due about 5 weeks after the author notifications went out. And then through June, July and August, we worked on assembling the proceedings, and those of you who have papers in the proceedings know that there were some bumps along the way, but we got there in the end, and you can download them now, or you probably already have downloaded them. And then so here we are today, as if you didn't know, ICFP 2017 at the start of September. Let me show you, put these things in a little bit of perspective. There's typically some charts that illustrate these talks. So over the last 10 years or so, just under, you can see 127 submissions is not quite the record. There was 133 in 2013 or 2012. I think that was when it was in Boston. But if you look at the general trend here, you can sort of see it seems to be growing. It seems to be on a steady trend upwards over here. One thing that's a little harder to interpret when you look at these numbers is what the acceptance rate is. So I have a chart that shows you here. We had actually an acceptance rate of about 35%, which is high, but not the highest that it's been in over this period. You can see 38% and a 36% there. So we accepted a lot of papers, but the program committee felt that we had a lot of good quality papers, and I hope you've felt that as you've been listening to the talks here today. I'll mention something about the special categories, a couple of things. We had 6 functional pearls this conference. That was actually out of a total of 20 submissions, so that was a good number, and 2 experience reports out of 4. So it's good to see some sort of health in those numbers there. One of the consequences of having quite so many papers is that we didn't have so much space for invited talks, so we only had space for 2 talks. Or maybe it wasn't anything to do with that. Maybe it was just the fact that in odd years we have 2 talks. So I can't tell, but anyway, so that's that there. Just a little bit of a word about scheduling. So a real big challenge, having decided we were going to have 44 papers. How do we fit 44 papers into a conference that doesn't typically have that many papers, hasn't had that many papers before? So the strategy we've had, which maybe isn't completely apparent just from the times, the odd times that are printed in the program, is we've been giving everybody 18 minutes for their talk and trying to allocate 4.5 minutes for the questions and answers for each paper. And we've had 2 keynotes as well. We needed a little bit of space for Sam's presentation about the programming competition and Ilya's presentations for the student research competition as well. So we needed both of those. So one of the questions that's on my mind is how could we make the program a little bit more relaxed? It hasn't always been the most relaxed of times here. Maybe that's just me, but maybe some of you are thinking the same way. So this is not for the immediate future, but something that maybe the community might want to think about is maybe should we be moving to parallel tracks? There's a strong commitment at the moment in the functioning of ICFP that we shouldn't do that. But this is one strategy if we're going to continue growing. Maybe we should also consider shorter talks or shorter questions and answers, although I think the Q&A is often one of the most valuable parts of these things. So these are not open questions, so these are open questions. We don't have solutions to these, but I thought it was a good opportunity to share these ideas with you here. Just a few more things. There's a list of topics in the call for papers, and there's a lot of topics in there, and authors, when they submit a paper, they self-select which topics among that list they think are relevant to their paper. So here's the initial chart, and you can see type systems is the most selected option, and the darker blue is actually the accepted papers, and the lighter shows you the papers that were not accepted here. So we have a lot of papers on type systems, and then the numbers go down a little bit. One thing this makes me think is that maybe that label isn't particularly useful anymore. Maybe we need to refine it and break it down. Session types and gradual typing based on our sessions this afternoon would probably be good things to add. But let me just reassure you that the old categories of polymorphism and type inference and so on still remain popular. If you scroll all the way to the bottom of this list, which isn't particularly informative, you can, however, see that some of those things like XML processing that, I don't know, maybe it's just I'm getting old, but that used to be a big thing. And on the other hand, maybe let's see, if you're picking something on artificial intelligence, you had 100% acceptance rate this year. So maybe artificial intelligence is going to be the big thing next time. Those of you who are interested about languages, this looked like, oh, there's a big number of Haskell submissions, so I thought I'd just pick out the language categories. You can see that, well, Haskell did get a lot of submissions, ML coming in next, but actually it looks like we were much harsher on the Haskell submissions, and so the overall percentage, the overall percentages are not that much, well, the numbers of papers are actually not that different in these cases. We had submissions from 25 different countries in total, and I just put this together. It seems like a lot of the submissions came from the USA, and I was just sort of listening to John Reppy's presentation from 2015. He had actually some very similar numbers here. It seems like coming from Argentina perhaps was the best place to be coming from if you wanted to get your paper accepted this time round. One thing that also struck me as I was looking through the numbers is just how many papers have multiple authors. And so I thought I'd put these numbers together just to sort of get some sense of what's happening collaboratively. And so there were 30 papers with a single author. 9 of those were accepted. But look at how many papers had multiple authors. And again, I'm just playing games really, but it looks like 55, either 55 or 11 co-authors are good numbers if you want to have lots of co-authors. So collaboration is a wonderful thing, and getting other people to sort of work on ideas with you, get your own built-in program committee before you ever submit the paper. So that's all good. Okay. We've had a couple of changes to go through this year. The biggest one perhaps is the transition to PAC MPL. This is a gold open access journal. So now articles are going to be archived in the ACM Digital Library, but they will be available for everybody for free without registration. And so that's a wonderful new thing. Yeah. Indeed. And I should add, this is with considerable support from ACM and SIGPlan, so we owe them a debt for that. It did involve a new document format, and as many people know, it actually involved two new document formats and a whole bunch of tweaks along the way as well. And it also had a slightly revised reviewing process. So actually, when I said on May the 1st papers were accepted, 30 of those papers were conditionally accepted, and they were given mandatory revisions that needed to be made by whenever it was, the 5th of June or something. And so they were checked during a second review phase. 30 papers were actually given those mandatory revisions, and in the end, all of those were accepted. Did this make a big difference? No, I don't think it made a huge difference, but I can remember a number of situations where I think it actually helped to improve the papers. We managed to catch some lingering bugs that might otherwise have made it through to the proceedings. So I don't think it was a big thing, but I think it was a useful thing for us to do. I want to give much thanks to the PAC MPL editorial board, ACM, and the folks at Conference Publishing, and especially here in this room, all the authors who endured all kinds of horrible format changes as we went through this process. And I'm pretty confident that it's going to be much smoother next time. So this was the inaugural edition of PAC MPL. So we did all the debugging, or a lot of the debugging for them. Another thing which I'm really excited about, other SIGPlan conferences have had this for a while. This year is the first time that we've had an artifact evaluation process for the conference. So you've seen these colourful badges attached to various papers in the proceedings, and the goal is to capture the fact that artifacts are available to support people using your work today, that they can use these things in the future. And so artifacts were submitted for 31 of 44 papers. I gather that's a pretty unusually high number, and also something unusual, but all of them were actually accepted. So this is, I think, a really good sign of capturing the artifacts and passing them on for the future generations, or at least for the folks next year and so on. And here I want to give much credit to the folks who did the artifact evaluation. I wasn't involved, the program committee wasn't involved in this, but Ryan Newton, Matthew Flatt, and the artifact evaluation committee. Let's give them a hand as well. So with all these changes, we had to defer a few. So the ICFP reviewing controller, we weren't able to use that this year, complete with a keyboard to enter your reviews. Maybe that will come in next year, but we'll defer that piece of technology. So in closing, it takes a community to make ICFP happen. And so thank you to all of you. I won't ask you to clap yourselves, but it really is a thank you to everybody. Our conference is in good health. We have close to record numbers of submissions and record numbers of attendees. That's been confirmed now, and also accepted papers. So that's all good sign. The transition to PAC MPL was bumpy, but it should be a lot smoother in the future. Talking of the future, where's Robby? There we are.
Just while Robby's coming, it takes a community, it also takes a program chair.
Hey.
All right, I'll just say a few words. I don't think I need that about next year. So we'll be in St. Louis next year. It's in the middle of that giant empty space surrounded by corn. Yep. The big change, or the big excitement for next year is we're co-located with Strange Loop. But people know about Strange Loop? As people, okay, it's a lot of industrial people that are very excited about functional programming. So it's a huge opportunity for us. They had, the year before this year, they had 1,300 people, and it sold out in an hour, tickets for that. Okay? So they've got a new plan, and they've got, I think they've got, they added about 40% more tickets this year, and so it hasn't sold out this year. So we should be good to be able to actually go with the co-location and visit them next year. Just to tell you a little bit about the structure for next year. So this is kind of the schedule of the days for how the co-location will work. I've been asked this by a few people, so I thought I'd make one last slide to just show you. So we'll be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Strange Loop is Thursday and Friday. And they have a pre-conf event, which is like sort of like our workshops, but they only do one day of that. And then there's this City Museum party that happens every year that's a fantastic thing. So you should definitely stick around for that in the evening. It's like the City Museum is not very well named. It's like a playground for adults. And it's fantastic. Yeah. There's a slide that's 5 stories tall. It's amazing. Someone who loves their blowtorch and loves to entertain others has spent several decades on the building. And I just this diagram is not to scale. That pre-conf is actually about the size of ICFP. And Strange Loop about 3 times the size of ICFP. Oh, and we'll be in an opera hall, because that's where they are, and it's kind of cool. All right, so let's end by just thanking Jeremy and the entire organizing committee one more time for this fantastic meeting.